From the studios of Ave Maria Radio in Ann Arbor, this is Veterans Radio. And now, here's your host, Dale Throneberry.
And good morning, America. How are you? My name is Dale Throneberry, and I'll be your host this morning. We're going to be talking about a subject very near and dear to everyone's hearts that is involved in the military, especially those that are in battles around the world. We're talking about dust-off pilots, dust-offs, medevacs, air ambulance, whatever you want to call it. These are the people that saved our lives, and we're so pleased to have a couple of people that are going to be on the program a little bit later on to talk about their experiences with dust-off, and also to talk about the helicopter, of course, as this is our second in our series on helicopters. We first did a program a couple of weeks ago on slicks. We're going into dust-off today, and in a couple of weeks we're going to be doing guns and then transports and so forth. So we're excited to be talking about a subject that I hope that I'm well acquainted with, and it really feels good to do these things.
What gives you that idea?
I don't know. I don't know. But it turns out that our guest later on in the program was in the same flight class that I was, so we're going to be talking about that. And the voice you just heard was Ken Rogie, and Ken is running our board for us today, and I'm excited to have him here, and thanks a lot, Ken, for doing that.
Hey, you're welcome. You sound good this morning.
I feel better than I did yesterday.
Yeah,
this is a mind over matter thing, so we're going to hopefully we won't need to use the cough button too much. Right there.
There you go.
Anyhow, we're going to skip over the news today and just talk a little bit about things that are coming up. Next week actually is a big event for Vietnam vets and veterans everywhere, and that's the 25th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Wall. And a couple of our members are going to be there, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk to them next week when he's in Washington.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever been to the Wall?
I have been to the Wall a number of times, and each time it seems to become more emotional than the last time.
It every time I go there, it just it really gets to me. I was there a couple of weeks ago with the Pride and Honor flight, and I swore I wasn't going to go to the Wall, but it's almost like a magnet. It draws you there.
Well, you can't help it. I mean, and the whole thing of going down the walkway down into the memorial itself, and then you come back out the other side, which is really interesting symbolically when you think about it.
Mm-hmm. But I couldn't get all the way up to the Wall. It got too emotional for me. I went up to the Lincoln Memorial, and I walked down to the basin, and I started to walk over, and I got probably 100 yards from the memorial, and I couldn't go any further. I could feel the emotions welling up, and I had to turn around and leave.
It wasn't amazing. Wasn't it you that somebody that told me a story recently about going to the Wall and somebody who had been there for the first time, and they were going to go look for a relative, and they didn't go to the book. There's a big book at the entrance to the Vietnam Wall that lists everybody and what panels that they're on. But it was a woman, and she walked almost directly to the Wall, and she was eye level to the name she was looking for.
No, I hadn't heard that.
And there's a lot of amazing things that happen there. But we are going to be talking about that. But we also want to talk about our Welcome Home segment. And we had a question the other day, why are we welcoming troops home every week? Well, one of the reasons that we're doing this, and I'll hand this over to Ken in just a moment, is that the Vietnam generation of veterans, and this is not whining, we just didn't quite get the welcome homes that we had anticipated. In fact, many of us thought we were coming back. We weren't coming home. And so the motto of Vietnam Veterans of America is never again will one generation of veterans abandon another. And so until there are veterans, until all military personnel are home and safe on terra firma of the United States, we're going to continue to welcome those troops home every single week. And Ken's got a couple of units that are returning home right now.
Yes, I do. And each week, Veterans Radio, we welcome home servicemen and women who have been stationed around the world in the service of our country. And as Dale said, we do this to let them know we honor their service and commitment to our country. The 25th Infantry Division of the 3rd Brigade returned home to Georgia this past week, and the 192nd Engineer Battalion returned to the Army Aviation Support Facility in Windsor Locks, Connecticut this past week. And the 82nd Airborne Division's 3rd Brigade Combat Team returned home to Fayetteville on Thursday. The unit finished serving a 15-month tour of duty in Iraq.
And we're back on Veterans Radio, and our topic of discussion today are dust-off pilots and the jobs that they do and the history of dust-off, where it began, and so on. And our first guest today is actually turns out to be a classmate of mine from Class 6829 at Fort Walters, Texas, where we learned to fly the incredible OH-23. And I want to welcome Steve Vermillion to Veterans Radio. Hi, Steve.
Yes.
Welcome to Veterans Radio.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks very much for getting up so early. You are in Puyallup, Washington?
Puyallup, Washington.
All right. And where is that?
Just a little bit south of Seattle and east of Tacoma.
Okay. There we go. For those of us, what are the coordinates of that? I don't know. We'll just write it on the windshield. Going to be a lot of it. I have to warn people, there probably will be a few in-jokes today that we won't quite understand. If you have a question or a comment that you would like to add to our program today, give us a call at 877-573-7825. 877-573-7825. I'm sure that some of you out there were helped by dust-off pilots. Let me tell you a little bit about Steve before we get into this. Steve was 20 years old when he served with the 45th Medical Company in Vietnam in 1969 as a pilot and aircraft commander. This is always a thing that gets me about you guys, of an unarmed dust-off helicopter. Flew a little over 1,100 hours of combat time, about 1,400 missions. You accounted for the rescue of approximately 2,200 soldiers. Steve was awarded for his missions over there the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and an Air Medal with V device. That's a pretty good resume, Steve.
Oh, it kind of went with the territory.
Yeah, I do understand that. And then you started off as a warrant officer, and then you went to become a RLO, a real live officer, and ended up, how long did you spend in the military?
26 years.
Well, congratulations to you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about the origin of the medevac program. I just got your book the other day, and I really found it interesting to see when helicopters went into service.
Well, actually, the first recorded, medical evacuation, if you want, to term it that, was probably back in the World War II area, where they used the H-2, the H-3. Probably most folks are familiar with the bridges at Tokori, the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And seeing that guy, that was in Korea, but it was a similar type helicopter, late World War II. And then January of, I think 1951, they had a couple of detachments in Korea. Once again, it was the OH-13 and that venerable OH-23 that we seem to fly in flight school. Pretty limited by high altitude, winds, no nighttime, and as you can attest to, probably not too sturdy for combat operations.
Absolutely.
Not willing to take a whole lot of hits and keep flying. But it certainly set the tone for evacuating the wounded off the battlefield. It certainly showed the potential of the helicopter, and I think it probably got the military planners looking to the future. And that future eventually brought us the UH-1A Huey helicopter, and that moved from the reciprocating engine, slow flight, non-IFR or instrument capable, now to a turbine engine, better performance, more duration, and somewhat limited IFR capability, on an initial basis.
Right, but at least for whatever reason, we could fly in the clouds.
Yeah,
not a very good idea. I have a friend who was in artillery in Vietnam, and he ended up flying OH-23s for artillery spotting because they ran out of loaches, and I can only imagine flying along at 60 knots and then jumping up to 120 knots, although we weren't supposed to go that fast on a regular basis. But just the idea of going to the Huey was amazing transition, I think, for the military. And then your unit was training at Fort Bragg, was it?
So it was initially training in Fort Bragg in the early 60s, and they were equipped with the old H-19s, and they were first deployed with the commander was Captain Temporelli, and they deployed out of there to Nha Trang, and they picked up the first 5 UH-1As, and ironically, those aircraft were destined for Alaska. So they had the cold weather kits and the extra insulation and the engine heaters and all that other miscellaneous equipment that would go to support a cold weather operation, and all the cold weather tentage, and then ended up in Nha Trang. So they had to strip all that excess gear out of there, and they ended up servicing all of Vietnam with 5 Hueys on an initial basis.
Wow. Tell us a little bit. I want to make everybody aware. We're talking with Steve Vermillion, who was a dust-off pilot, actually Dust-Off 40, and he's got his own book that has come out recently called Dust Off, No Compromise, No Rationalization, No Hesitation, Just Fly the Mission. Tell me a little bit about where you got that title.
Well, actually, that came from the founder, I guess, if you would, or the father of Dust-Off, and that was Charles Kelly. And, he was the second commander, if you might, after Captain Temporelli. And he set up a detachment down in Sac Trang.
That's down in 4 Corps, right?
Down in 4 Corps, down in the Delta. And, at that time, the Hueys were a prime piece of equipment. They were moving now into troop transport, trying to get away from the old H-21s, H-19s, CH-34s. And, here they are assigned to a medical unit with a specific mission. And commanders at that time were looking for the versatility. Why can't it fly as a slick one day, fly as a medevac the next day, and possibly have armament on it, on another given day, kind of a utility aircraft, if you might. And, Kelly was very adamant about his mission. They flew 24 hours a day. Matter of fact, he just made circuits at night, touching base with each one of the outposts out there, come in and extract people, bring them back to the base. Built one heck of a reputation for the capabilities of Dust-Off. And, his motto was no compromise, no rationalization, no hesitation, just fly the mission. There's no excuses. If the weather's bad, you check it out. Regulations at that time, and even during my era, in 1969, said if the landing zones were hot or insecure, you weren't supposed to go in and land until they could be secured, or you had a gunship escort. And as you and I know, I don't think there was such a description of a landing zone over there.
No, in fact, in reading your book, I found it really fascinating. It's kind of, those time travel going back when we were going through flight school, and they taught us how to do night landings, and they had these huge lights, set up in a nice thing in a field, 100 yards wide by 100 yards deep.
Right.
And on a lot of occasions, not only you, but helicopter pilots everywhere over there, we ended up landing in landing zones that were maybe 2 or 3 inches longer or wider than our rotor blades were.
Or we made them a little wider.
Well, I was going to get into that later.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the origin of your of the call sign Dust-Off. Where did that come from?
Well, back in the early days. Now, my experience was I never had a CEOI. We stayed on, or an SOI. Mm-hmm. We stayed on one frequency, or we had an alternate. And our call sign was always consistent, and that was, the Dust-Off. Mm-hmm. And our frequencies never changed. But back, even the ground units changed on a regular basis. Their call signs changed, and they did that on a regular timed basis. Since we didn't have secure radios at that time, it was a methodology for security.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the Kelly era, they had a battle going on, and it was time to change. And his call sign on that window just happened to be the random dust-off. I mean, they had different words in there. It could be bandit, banshee, or something like that. And somehow the dust-off nomenclature came up. It stayed extended through the battle. They didn't change frequencies for fear of not compromise, but just adding more chaos to the battle, as everybody would change frequencies and try to reestablish comms. And that dust-off moniker, from that point on, kind of stayed with that flight crew and those flight crews down in the 57th. And then he finally got it adapted as a set call sign, so that when you heard dust off, you knew that you were talking to a medical evacuation helicopter.
Right. We're talking with Steve Vermillion, author of a book called Dust Off. Surprise. Steve was in Vietnam in 1969 as a warrant officer. Continued his career as a lieutenant. Ended up being lieutenant colonel, I believe.
Yes.
And as talking about dust off and medevacs. Now I know the first CAV called their dust offs medevacs. And a lot of different organizations out there flew medevac missions, not, as you mentioned earlier about using the utilitarian aspects of the Huey, is that sometimes you guys weren't available. You were off busy doing something else, saving somebody somewhere, and then every once in a while a Slick would get a call and we'd go in and grab them ourselves.
Absolutely.
Which was, again, we've talked about that where pilots, it seemed the helicopter pilots, if there was ever anybody in trouble, and it really didn't make that much difference if you were an American or Vietnamese or Thai or ROC or whatever it is, we'd go and get you.
And they even did medevac with gunships and with loaches. That was a unique occurrence, but it was usually with one of their crews that were down. And I don't know that anybody ever turned down a soldier to get him out of the battlefield.
I don't think so either. Let's talk a little bit about your crew itself. It's a little bit unusual the way that your crew was set up.
Well, we had two pilots, which would be typical for, a Huey. And in dust-off, we had one crew chief and one medic. If you went to the CAV, as you just mentioned, you had door gunners, so they actually had a third member of the crew. So the crew chief and a gunner would be take care of the aircraft security for them, and then they had a fifth person that was a medic. Most of us were probably in the age bracket like you, 20 to 22. Sometimes the crew chiefs were as young as 18 and 19. Mm-hmm. Likewise with the medic. For us, it was a very bonded group. We relied heavily on the medics and the crew chiefs for aircraft clearance when we were going into tight landing zones, and to take care of everything in the back. The pilots obviously took care of everything up front, but without that medic that was cross-trained as a crew chief, and without the crew chief who was cross-trained as a medic, our mission would have been much more difficult, almost impossible.
Yeah, I would think so. We have a caller on the line that wanted to talk to you, Steve. And Jim, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Hi, Steve. Jim Van Dorn, Portland, Oregon.
Oh, Jim, how you doing today?
We just had a reunion last month, Steve, and a bunch of us from that era. I only had, I don't have any real war stories. I wanted to comment on the progression of the helicopter that Steve talked about.
Go right ahead.
When I first met Steve, there was a reunion of that first CAV medevac outfit, and I got invited to join even though I wasn't part of that unit. And they flew in a modern Black Hawk helicopter, ambulance for the event, and I was kind of in awe of all the equipment they had. I think when I was in the back as a medic, my kit bag didn't contain much more than the ground medics had. And the medic on this Blackhawk said, "Never mind the gear, we're still building on the techniques you guys invented on the fly in Vietnam." Kind of did my heart proud.
And it should. And we want to. I thank you very much for the job that you did over there. I think
Jim is atypical of all the medics back there. As he said, their medic bag was pretty slim in contents. Of course, they were all great scroungers,
yes.
and they would always go to the aid station or over to some place like the 93rd or the 24th,
mm-hmm.
and just scrounge as many supplies as they could get their hands on, as well as other equipment that we weren't either allowed to carry, not authorized for issue, or whatever, and stash that stuff away. And you'd be surprised what those guys did in the back of a vibrating helicopter. Sometimes under fire immediately. 8 or 9 wounded people in the back of the helicopter, trying to triage and treat and figure out who needed their attention the worst, which most cases, it was hard to tell which one, really needed the attention the quickest. They were all in dire straits.
I would totally agree. We're talking with Steve Vermillion here on Veterans Radio about dust-off and medevac. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like to add to the program today, give us a call at 877-573-7825. It's 877-573-7825. Jim, you're still on the line?
Yes, I am. Wanted to comment on part of what you'll see in Steve's book about the unauthorized gear, one of which was the ambu bag, which was basically a hand-operated breathing apparatus so that the medic didn't wear himself out performing CPR. And I flew, I don't know how many missions, don't know how many people we evacuated when I was aboard, but I know I saved one life in that time because of that bag.
Was that something that you guys invented on your own?
No, it was just handed to me on one day when I was first up, and I put it in the back of the helicopter and said, okay, I'll read about it later because I hadn't been trained on it. And the first mission was to pick up a mid-40s sergeant in a rear area that had been found unconscious next to his bunk. No diagnosis available. They loaded him aboard, and I literally watched him die. The eyes do roll back. The breathing stopped. I whipped out the bag and started putting it on him, brought him around. As he started to come around, he had the idea that somebody was trying to suffocate him, so he would push the mask away. So I'd stop, and then he'd stop breathing, and I started again. I did this all the way back. It's probably the only flight I ever was on that was more than 15 or 20 minutes. And every time he came around, I'd stop pushing on it. He'd stop breathing, and I started again. I even had to use it as they loaded him on the gurney and wheeled him into ER. I had to trot along next to him with that bag. And I could not have done CPR for 45 minutes, even if the crew chief and I took turns.
No, I could imagine
that saved that soldier's life. And Steve can take you up to speed on what happened to the bags that his crews had.
Well, I was going to go from there, but I remember something in the book that I read that you were talking about. At one time, they asked you to actually carry oxygen on board?
We never did, but that was there in 65. Steve was there years later, and I don't know what equipment or gear was standard in.
Yeah, we never carried oxygen.
No, I just remembered something that I read about in your book that somebody said, "Oh, you need to carry oxygen," and you're going, "Yeah, right."
Yeah. Well, right. Some of the units, they may have had oxygen, but as you know, if you take a round in a pressurized oxygen bottle, you have a different beast on your hands.
I was going to say, you already had enough explosive fuel on board anyway.
Yeah.
That stuff. Anyway, moving right along. Also, another piece of equipment that you had was a hoist.
Yes.
And that was added when you got there, Steve, or just after?
It was brought on board in about I think 67, somewhere in that area. Great piece of equipment. landing zones that units, they're in triple canopy jungle.
Right.
They're more than likely under enemy pressure. They don't have the capability to move a mile or two to a landing zone without, increasing their vulnerability and their risk. And this hoist allowed us to drop a couple different devices. I used predominantly the jungle penetrator, which was like a little torpedo, if you might. And it would go down through the canopy, and then it had 3 fold-out paddles on it that you could seat the wounded. Is it the most comfortable device? No, but it was a device. If we used a Stokes litter, it had trouble getting through the jungle canopies and things like that and get hung up. For back injuries, we had like a rigid litter that would bring a person up essentially vertical, but it took a while to strap people in.
We have about a minute to go, and I just wondered if you could, until our break at the bottom of the hour, but could you tell me a little bit about some of the problems that you had with these hoists?
Well, we had a twisted cable instead of a braided cable. So as this cable as the penetrator would go down through the canopy, it hit things and it began to spin and things like that. Every once in a while, it would unravel and get hung up in the gearing mechanisms, and you could very well have a person suspended anywhere from 150 to 200 feet below the aircraft and not be able to bring him back up with the hoist. So you'd physically have to hover the aircraft vertically, have the crew chief give you instructions to move the aircraft one way or another, and then bring this gentleman or the wounded soldier up through the canopy.
Need to take a break real quick.
All right.
We're going to be back talking more about dust-off and medevac. You're listening to Veterans Radio.
The Medal of Honor is the highest award for valor in combat given a member of the Armed Forces of the United States. There have been over 3,400 recipients of the nation's highest award. This is one of them.
Specialist Robert Patterson attacked 5 North Vietnamese Army bunkers single-handedly. Details after this. Patterson was serving as a fire team leader of the 3rd Platoon, Troop B, during an assault against a North Vietnamese Army battalion that was entrenched in a heavily fortified position. When the leading squad of the 3rd Platoon was pinned down by heavy automatic weapon and rocket-propelled grenade fire from 2 enemy bunkers, Patterson and the 2 other members of his assault team moved forward under a hail of enemy fire to destroy the bunkers with grenade and machine gun fire. Observing that his comrades were being fired on from a 3rd enemy bunker covered by enemy gunners and one-man spider holes, Sergeant Patterson, with complete disregard for his own safety and ignoring the warning of his comrades that he was moving into a bunker complex, assaulted and destroyed the position. Although exposed to intense small arms and grenade fire from the bunkers and their mutually supporting emplacements, Sergeant Patterson continued his assault upon the bunkers that were impeding the advance of his unit. Sergeant Patterson single-handedly destroyed, by rifle and grenade, 5 enemy bunkers, killed 8 enemy soldiers, and captured 7 weapons.
The Medal of Honor series is a production of Veterans Radio.
And we're back on Veterans Radio, and we're talking about dust-off and dust-off pilots and crews. And I should just point out real quickly that Ray Schrader of Schrader Yachts was also in Class 6829, a Red Hat. So we'll move right along there. I'm talking with Steve Vermillion, author of a new book called Dust Off. Steve was a warrant officer in Vietnam in 1969. He also received the Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Air Medal with V device. And Steve, we were just talking about using the penetrator. I wondered if we could tell some of the let's start talking about some stories here. This is what our program is all about. We like to talk to people about what we did or what people have done in the past, what we call ordinary people who have done extraordinary things. And so we're going to ask some people, if you have a story, give us a call at 877-573-7825. One of the ones, Steve, in your book I found most fascinating was when you attempted to do a night mission, and you weren't actually able to get in, but coming out of Swan Lock.
Right. Is that the one up on the mountain?
Yeah, that's the one on the mountain.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that one.
Well, that was a mixture of probably being too young and thinking we're invincible. There was a mountain just east of Swan Lock. I think it was about 3,500 feet high. They had a signal relay unit up on top. I'd been in there a couple times prior, and they had a concrete pad, and the one drawback was they had a lot of signal antennas surrounding that pad that were certainly obstacles to aircraft coming in and taking off. And I was an aircraft commander at the time, and I was flying with Dan Voss, who was also an aircraft commander. So we had two aircraft commanders on board, and actually Dan was the pilot in command at that time, and I was his co-pilot. And the mission was to extract one wounded U.S. soldier who had a mortar round explode in the tube and had a traumatic amputation of one or more limbs. So that was a signal for us that there was a real sense of urgency. I mean, we knew we had to get in there and get this guy out of there. Plus, we had a doc in Swan Lock that was on the radio as well, encouraging us to get in and make that medevac because the guy wouldn't survive, in his opinion. We tried. They had what they called spooky flares, very intense illumination flares. They had a small number of these, and they decided that they would try to put one in the form, three in the form of a triangle, at least to mark the shape of a pad, so that we could descend down through the cloud base. And I might say that the top of this mountaintop was fully obscured in cloud. We made one attempt, got down into the clouds, and the flares went out, and we went instant IFR.
That means you're in the clouds. You can't see anything.
We're in the clouds. We lost ground reference. There's no visibility, the stars or anything. We were instantly on instruments, and we made an instrument climb out. I'm not sure we were on instruments. I was in the right seat. I think Dan was flying by the seat of his pants, and we weren't in the clouds that long. We made a couple other attempts, and then we tried hovering up the side of the mountain and thinking, in our
primary brain, yes.
In our primary brain, and not using it too well, that we could hover up underneath the clouds, and the clouds didn't necessarily go right to the trees. We proved that theory to be false more than one time. And we finally made one attempt. It was the last attempt we could make that night. They were out of flares, so this had to be it. Dan set up his final approach, and we descended down. We were barely had any forward momentum at all, but we had a pretty good sink rate. Had a good lock on the flares. I was on the instruments, and the crew chief and medic had the cargo doors open. They were laying head to foot across the cargo compartment, keeping an eye out for radio antennas, any other signs of ground obstacles, so we'd keep the aircraft clear from their perspective. And we got down. We had to have been within just a few feet of the ground when the flares went out. Unfortunately, we lost control of the aircraft. As sitting in the right seat. Of course, Dan still had control of the aircraft, or at least he had his hands on the aircraft controls. The RMI, or the heading indicator, began to spin. The RPM warning lights came on. Quick indication, we were below 6,000 RPM, which for us was pretty critical, if you remember flying the Huey. And, there we were spinning. There was dust, little bits of bushes and trees. Whether they were on the ground or we were hitting them is hard to ascertain. But they were flying through the cargo compartment. Some of the on-tied equipment or unsecured equipment that we had in the back flew out just due to the G-force. And we fortunately came out into the clear blue.
Wow.
So
I wonder what your attitude was at that time. I mean, the aircraft's attitude. I know what your attitude probably was.
Yeah. I think we stayed in a pretty level attitude. I think Dan had his eyes on his small attitude indicator on his side of the aircraft. The one instrument that caught my attention was the RMI, and then from there it was the RPM indication. And I never looked at the torque. It was too fast. It was not a point in time where you'd want to switch controls from one pilot to the other.
Right.
I think if he would have done that, we probably would have lost control of the aircraft more so than we had at that time.
I always think it's amazing the way that some, pilots and anybody that's been in the military, that you survive some of these incidents that you've been in strictly by luck or by the grace of God. That's when you, and in your book, and actually we're going to be talking about this on a show later on about, the influence that God has some people in foxholes. And you suddenly start to pray quite a bit. We do have another call on the line. We've got Bruce calling from Savannah, Georgia. Bruce, you on there?
I am.
Hi, Bruce. Welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you. Hi, Steve.
Hey, is this Bruce McCartney?
It is.
Hey, man. How you doing?
Pretty good. I'd just like to mention the fact that one of Major Kelly's legacies that's not quite often mentioned is the fact that he really bucked the command structure when needed. And that's one of the traditions that was carried on by virtually all the pilots I flew with the year that I flew with the 45th.
And when were you there, Bruce?
I flew with 45th from 69 to 70.
Okay.
And, there was one mission where my crew chief was Paul Pazeric, and Steve was the AC, and we had a hoist in Swanlock, and we hoisted up a couple guys, and one of them was really bad, and I told Steve if he doesn't redline him back to Long Bend, one guy wasn't going to make it. When we landed at 24th, the guy was still alive. We put him on a gurney. The ship had to go into maintenance, I think, or a check of the engine or something.
Yeah, I
Steve got his butt reamed over that, I'm sure. I think he did that more than once, and he's not the only pilot that did that.
I think we all owe extreme gratitude to the Huey and to Bell Helicopter, because those things would exceed their red lines numerous times inadvertently. We weren't even aware of it many times, and it would just keep going.
Yeah.
I can't imagine a machine today.
And it saved a lot of lives.
I think so.
Hey, Bruce, tell them how many tours you had in Vietnam.
I had 4 tours. But only one is dust off.
Only one, right?
Yeah.
That was only one. What?
One dust off. They wouldn't let me stay. I wanted to stay, but they wouldn't let me, which was probably a good thing. It ended up, pretty good. So.
I want to ask you guys to hang on the line. I see we got another call coming in shortly, but hang on the line. We got about 30 seconds before we go to our next break. And I want to, Steve, you mentioned earlier about the SOIs and slick pilots and gunnies. We all had to carry an SOI, which is standard operating instructions, I believe it was, and had all the radio frequencies in the world in there. And every day they would change. And that you had a mission, I believe it was in the Delta, where somebody got a hold of the frequency and set up a fake mission for you. So hold on to that thought and remember that story, because we're going to come back to that in just a moment. You're listening to Veterans Radio, and we'll be right back after these messages. And we're back on Veterans Radio, and we're talking to a bunch of dust-off pilots and medics and everything. I think this is a great show today, and I'm excited about that. Steve Vermillion is the author of Dust Off, and I better give you the opportunity to get your plug in now, Steve. Where can we find this book?
Right now, it's just on my website, and that website is dustoff40.com.
Okay, dustoff40.com, and they go there and they can order the book from you.
That's correct.
Okay, we'll try to get that up on our website as soon as we possibly can. I wanted you to tell that story real quickly about the incident where you were set up. I'll let you do that.
Okay. I'd like to take one moment, though. I don't know if Bruce is still on, but...
Yep, I believe he is. In fact, we've got another caller coming on soon.
Oh, good. Bruce is, the fine example of the medics that we had in Dust Off. This guy had 3 tours on the ground, and then came and volunteered to fly Dust Off. He brought a lot of knowledge with him, and we got all kinds of medics with that similar background. Mm-hmm. But boy, they sure enhanced the saving of lives in the Dust Off role.
I think it sounds as though we're going to have to do another program on them.
Oh, I think so.
I think it sounds like a great idea.
Oh, I would fully agree, because they have a story that's not really been told yet. We're working on it, but not necessarily out where it's told from their perspective.
I agree. Okay,
so you want to know about
I want to know about this landing that you attempted.
Well, we were flying down in the Delta. It was daytime. The call for assistance came through the medical channels. So we got a normal call from our RTO that gave us the coordinates and what we could anticipate. The mission sheet was a U.S. advisor with ARVNs, or regional forces, guys, basically Vietnamese. And we made contact on site with this gentleman on the radio. He certainly spoke good English. He told us that the site would not be at his location, but he was in contact with his advisor's counterpart at another location, and he would coordinate it. We got out there. We asked him to pop smoke. We asked him to identify it. They identified, I believe it was a yellow smoke, and we confirmed it. But normally, if a landing zone is secure, you can see somebody milling around. There's usually a soldier that's going to mark a location where they want us to land. But this smoke had been tossed out in this rice paddy from the Nippopon line a pretty good distance, and probably a Roger Clemens kind of pitch out there. We were concerned about it, and we approached that landing zone very cautiously. We came in low level, obscured behind, or as much as we could behind a Nippopon line, popped up over it, picked up the smoke, and still nobody milling around, even though we were on real short final. And I told my co-pilot, I said, stay with me here. This does not look good. We'll stick our nose in a little bit further and see what's what. We came to a hover over the smoke. Still nobody's around us. The medic and crew chief are looking, and finally the medic spots some folks waving at us in the tree line. And he said they're waving for us to come over. And I picked up the location of where he was pointing. I saw them. They were waving. And so I started hovering over there, albeit we were at a fast hover. And we weren't at 3 feet. We were probably about 10 foot high. Mm-hmm. And I said, it's still not looking right. And we probably got within about 30 meters of that Nippopon line, and they just opened up on us. course, my reaction is I kicked right pedal real quick. That caused the cargo compartment, the back of my seat, and the cockpit to get sprayed by AK-47 fire. And we were fortunate. We were able to fly the aircraft out. A couple of those incoming rounds exploded smoke grenades inside the aircraft. So we had an aircraft full of smoke grenades. Folks are feeling around on the floor trying to find them and throw them overboard before they caught something on fire. So we were breathing a little bit of purple and yellow and green smoke, and got the aircraft out of there, set it down, probably about 1.5 kilometers away, inspected it. There was oil all over the place. We couldn't really find a source, and we had a severed or partially severed tail rudder cable and some other structural damage.
It's amazing that you were able to survive that one. I have another call on the line for you, probably another one of your buddies, Gary Calhoun. Gary, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Hi, Dale. Good to talk to you again, and hi, Steve.
Hey, Gary, how you doing?
I had the pleasure of flying with Steve at the 45th when I was at started off in Dongtam, which is in 4 Corps, and when they turned that over to the Vietnamese during the Vietnamization program, I moved up to Long Binh and flew with Steve until May of 70. So I was there from September 69 to May of 70, and Steve and I overlapped a bit. And one of the things I want to mention, I've read Steve's book a couple times and given it to my son and my nephew, and have a copy ready for my now 8-year-old son also. But it's a great book. And one thing I want to mention is Steve dedicates the book to the guys in the back. And that's the show you're talking about having, and that without those guys, Dust Off, was really nothing. To be an air ambulance, you can't be an ambulance unless you have and it turned out to be the 2 medics in the back, because the crew chiefs would end up being cross-trained so well, as Steve pointed out. You really had 2 medics in the back, and I think you could very well do a great show on quote the guys in the back, as Steve has talked about them. But I would talk about one mission, I guess, that coordinated a lot of different things. It was a hoist mission. That was the bane of all dust-off pilots. I guess that's the only thing that separated us distinctively from the slick pilots that in your show last time. That the slick pilots did a lot of medevacing, that's for sure, and dust-offing when they were right on scene and we couldn't get there fast enough for something. So, but we covered that a bit in the slick pilot group. But I had a night hoist mission, which is the thing you don't want to have to do as a dust-off pilot. And this was for a bunch of Thai troops. I went out, got over to the area. I only had gunship coverage twice in my whole year tour of Vietnam. I'm not sure how many other pilots had that experience, but usually it took too long to get them there. But this happened to be close to a place where the gunships were. In fact, they were there almost at the same time I was. I always felt that if you had to wait for them, it really wasn't much good. They were just going to avenge your death anyway. And so anyway, we hoisted. It was the Thai troops. There was a English-speaking person on the ground, and we had there was 11 or 12, and you definitely don't want to do 2 hoist missions in one night. So we brought all of them up at the same time on one mission. And the biggest thing was trying to keep these guys from bringing their weapons with them. They didn't want to be separated from them. So if they bring the weapon up, we just have to throw it back down, because we could hold 11 Thai patients. You couldn't carry 11 U.S. patients. But we got all of them and then we started taking off from the LZ. And in addition to having gunship coverage, I had that night, for the first and only time, Firefly, which is an aircraft, and you know better than me what height they were, but they had this neon light.
Yeah, it's like a huge spotlight on it.
Huge light. So anyway, they lit up my LZ. Imagine doing a hoist mission where it's lit up like a football field. And so that was no problem. Usually the crew chief and medic, you depend upon them so much to keep your rotor blades clear and your tail rotor clear. But it was easy for them with this with the big light on. So we got the 11 guys on board, pulled pitch to come out, and I told the what they call Firefly to turn off the light, and unfortunately he didn't do that. And as I was coming out, I'm swearing at him to turn the light off, and still didn't. And all of a sudden we took small arm fire, and I'm sure it lifted me at least 5 feet in the air. And this is the aircraft, Steve. I don't know if you were still there then, but this was the aircraft that got towed back over to Long Bend and had 54 holes in it.
Oh.
It was dripping fuel. Fortunately, it had enough fuel because it wasn't very far away. That's one thing people don't know. If you got shot up and you had very little fuel on board, if you had vapors, that's when you would explode. But if you had a full tank, then you could take fire and make it back. So,
I have to jump in here, Gary. Unfortunately, we've run out of time again. We need a 2-hour show. That's all there is to it. I want to thank all of you for being on Veterans Radio today, and we'll have you back again, I promise. Thanks very much to Steve Vermillion, to Jim from Oregon, and Bruce from Savannah, and Gary from Ann Arbor. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you again.
All righty.
Okay, thank you. Ken, you had something that you wanted to say before we checked out tonight.
Yes, I do. Brigadier General Paul Tibbets died Thursday at the age of 92. General Tibbets, at the age of 30, was the pilot of the Enola Gay, the aircraft that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and we miss him. He was a great hero.
We do, and we should point out that we did do a show on that. We unfortunately didn't have him on the program, but we did have his navigator on the program and talked about that. And he said right up to the end, he said he had no regrets.
No regrets.
No
he
regrets
was following
whatsoever.
orders, and he had no regrets.
I want to thank everybody for listening in to Veterans Radio today, especially to our sponsors. Tune in next week and see what we've got going for you. You've been listening to Veterans Radio. You're dismissed.